How you doing? Hi. How are you guys doing? I had intended to do this video alone, but Dory had other ideas. I guess he's intrigued about the possibilities that this idea presents. So all this, wow, it got boring already. All this is sharing some terminology that I use, and you've probably, if you watch this channel, have heard it creep out here and there. And I also want to talk a little bit about why I use the terminology. As a person who actively enjoys playing a lot of different games, I've found it both necessary because it's useful and necessary because my mind works that way and it's a part of my satisfaction. I've found it necessary to actively analyze what goes on in play, and that has led me to defining certain things. I've put my own labels and terms on things. It's shorthand for thought. It strengthens pattern recognition. And in, my circle of people that I talk about these things with, it helps further our progress in developing these analytical skills and these descriptive skills. It has problems. Terms tend to drift in meaning. We have difficulty communicating the nuances of a particular term, and then that broadens and dilutes or weakens its meaning, and then it slowly starts to apply to other things. And then, of course, new people enter the conversation on its periphery, and that further dilutes meaning as they're not really involved in how the term was created. They haven't really seen many instances of it in use, and so they apply it like what they think it means rather than what it was intended to mean. And then each iteration of it being exposed to a broader community has an effect on what it means. I have a love-hate relationship with jargon. I find it very useful in a tight-knit group of people who create that jargon for themselves or who have a clear-cut way to access what that jargon is supposed to represent and understand how and when to use it. And I have a dislike for what happens to jargon if we don't help people understand it. It then stops being helpful and starts becoming part of the problem. This is true for any of the activities that I participate in, but in role-playing games, we are especially vulnerable to this because of the real dearth of common ground. We have all of this common ground. We don't have an awful lot of research. We don't have an awful lot of material which presents the hobby back to us from the point of view of experts within it for the purpose of sharing what we do with each other for the purpose of exploration and development within it. Now, if we were a sport, there'd be all kinds of material. There'd be accepted terminology. There would be, accepted practices. Do the thing this way because if you do it that way, you're going to get hurt. Or use this equipment, but, for the love of God, don't use that equipment because that causes, this. And you know what I mean? If we were some other older hobby, we would have some of these official resources upon which to draw. And we might still disagree with them, but they're presented to us in such a fashion that we can both see and feel the continuity within the activity as a whole. We don't have that yet in role-playing games. Even in the concept of modern gaming itself, things are on shaky ground. It's difficult to know what people are talking about when they talk about play, even. And then we as a community, well, this is something that you do with a small group of people. And until recently, it hasn't really been possible to tap into or tune into how other people play outside of things like conventions. And convention play isn't normal play. Very little of it is what we should consider normal. What is normally done in the privacy of your group's game space is now being done publicly. What would normally be done with people who know each other and play regularly with each other is now being done with strangers who are possibly only ever going to talk to each other for the number of hours that the game runs. There are so many things that are different about convention play. So, even with something like streamed games, we have games that are streamed, and we have games that are performed for streams, and everything in between. We have games that, we can actually hear and actually see what's going on, and games where we can't. And we have games where all of that real around the table stuff is removed, and character imagery or icons or maps or something covers it over so that we can get cues into the imagined space that those players are creating, but we don't see the actual play. There's so many different variations. There's still so many barriers between what we do around our own tables and being able to see what other people do around their own tables. Again, to dip into sports, you can simply turn on the TV and find some representation, generally speaking, of your sport somewhere. And it will be being performed pretty much like everyone else does it around the world. So we're not there yet, and we might not even want to be. We're not a singular sport, and we're not some kind of sporting association. We are a group of people who have some things in common, some more things in common in some cases than in others, but it's kind of like saying, I like sports that involve a ball, right? Role-playing games have that kind of difference, right? Because the difference between playing lacrosse and, I don't know, water polo, there's a lot of things that are similar, but I think people would object to bringing a stick into the pool. So what all this means is we have a difficult time talking to each other. It's taken a long time to get to that point. So in my head and in my small circle of associates, we have different ways of talking about things, and these terms change over time. But what are they? Well, I like to focus in on the things that we pay attention to as the player. I'm less interested in what the game is requiring of us, such as, is it a simple single die roll where we have to recognize what was rolled, or is it more complicated, meaning there might be dice, there might be cards, there might be chips that are required, or status tokens or something like that. I'm less interested in those details, and I'm more interested in the play state of the player as a result of playing that game with those people at this time. So people talk about immersion, full stop. I don't talk about immersion. I talk about immersion in something that might be their sense of their character. That might be in their mind's eye imagining of the scene. That might be in that sense of fun and camaraderie around the table. It might be in that group identity. It might be in the intellectual challenge. Who knows? That's an interesting conversation for me. Immersion in something. The game will have an effect on that immersive quality. It will affect people differently depending on what they want from the game, depending on what they're putting in the game, depending on the circumstances in which the game is played, the people that the game is played with. And all of those individual elements, likewise, have an effect. Did you have a bad day at work? Is your ex sitting across the table from you looking daggers at you because you haven't quite sorted out who gets to keep the game or whatever? There are things that affect what happens normally. All of that is interesting. Some of these things are in our control, often purely through the vehicle of our social skills, and have nothing to do with the game. So again, they're interesting, but they're a part of things. But what about our actual stance, our way of conceptualizing the game at all? This is the thing that's most interesting to me. And I see this divided into two areas. There's in character and there's out of character. Now, when we talk about in character, which is kind of a borrowed term from theater, when we talk about in character, it doesn't necessarily mean performance. And when we talk about out of character, it doesn't necessarily mean focused on non-game things. So what do I mean by that? Even at the most general, if we look out there about the way everybody uses these terms, the in character versus the out of character, we tend to think of in character connected with dialogue, with action, or more specifically, right action for that character, which is its connection to theater. And when we think about out of character, we tend to think about things that the player does as the player. But an out of character statement might be completely focused on the game. It might be talking about where is an object in the room. It might be giving a die roll result. It might be describing what something looks like. Right? Obviously, this is not coming from the character, from the character's perspective. I mean, how many of us walk into the room, are seen by the people in the room, and then say, right, I walk into the room, my cloak swirls about me with my blaster pistol riding low on my hip, my silver hair glinting in the dim light of the bar, and I say, right. Was the person giving the description out of character? Was the person who then shifted into the dialogue, the thing that got said, hi guys, how you doing? Is that person now in character? Was there a switch, a flip between out of character and in character? Or instead, was there an overriding stance and a focus within that stance? That's the question that I like to think about most these days. So let's go through these terms. I'm going to start with in character and assume it's over here. And then we're going to move across that's right, spectrum. That's the right word. We're going to move across the spectrum until we get to the end of out of character. So we're going to define the end of out of character from a game perspective, from where you and your fellow players are no longer talking about the game. You're talking about things like, what are you going to do on the weekend? Is your dog feeling better? Do you need to stop for gas? That kind of stuff. All right, purely no longer dealing with the game, just dealing with you on the social level. That's the ending point for out of character. That's here. And then we're going to go all the way over here to in character, where conceivably we could get so in character that in that moment, however long or short it might be, in that moment, you are in the moment. You are practically seeing what's happening. You're sharing the emotional reactions. There's bleed between you and the fictional imaginings of play. You're feeling the emotions and you're practically seeing what's there. That's going to be, we can't get any more in character than actually feeling like the character, right? I suppose if we were able to actually translate ourselves into an alternate reality where all these things were real, a la, Guardians of the Flame or the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, that would be even more in character. But for the purpose of this discussion, we're going to stop there. All right, so between those two bounds. So we've got in character, moving through character all the way to out of character. And the direction doesn't matter, right? Now, I posit that it's entirely possible to play for years and years and years and years and years and never once be in character. That might sound surprising, because what about all those times you delivered dialogue? Isn't that in character? And, for a general conversation, sure, that's in character. But I'm looking at things a little differently. And I'll throw in a caveat. This is observation. This is analysis that I find useful. It may never in your entire life ever matter to you or anybody that you meet. Or you may find it really interesting and useful and intriguing, or answer some kind of question, or who knows what. I can't say. I'm just doing what I do, which is share observations from my experience as a gamer. I think too often we don't share. I think too often we settle for the game that everybody else is playing and the way that they're playing it. I think too often we're willing to go home thinking, yeah, tonight was okay, rather than making those small adjustments, or even trying to figure out what those small adjustments might be to make the experience better for everyone. I think that because it's just a game, sometimes we settle. I'm not that person, right? I get a lot of fun from all the different games that I play and all the different ways that I play them. And I hope that when I share these observations, these experiences, these actual plays or talks like this, that maybe out there somewhere in the world there might be one person for whom it's useful. And if there's even that one person, then it was worth the time. So, in character, out of character. I posited that it's possible to spend your entire time as a role-playing gamer without ever once being in character. Like I mean it here today. And likewise, it's possible to spend most of your time playing in character, even though it might not look like it. So let's talk about that. I posit that we could observe an approach to play where the player is trying to play in character as their character. They want to limit, in a fun way, limit their choices to what that character would know and do and think and feel in that moment. They do not want to have control over anything else other than the character's decisions based on what that character would be experiencing in the moment. So what they say, or what they hope to say during the game session, what they do, how they interact with the system, is all based around that approach. So a game that is asking them to do something where they have to talk to other players as a player about something from a perspective beyond their characters will be less satisfying, as it doesn't meet their hoped for approach. It might still be fun. Playing with those people could be great. But there may be something about that player that's drawing them to this other type of game that doesn't ask them to step so far outside of their hoped for approach or way of accessing or interacting with the game. In character, as character. Now, if we take one step further away, we can still be in character, but now we're looking at the character as its creator. So in character as creator. What are we creating? We could also call this as author or writer, right? So we're looking at the situation based on what we hope to have happen to the character. We're looking at the situation based on how we want it to influence the character. We might be in a game, or we might be the type of player, or we might be in the sort of group where we're thinking about, what am I going to use my experience points for? Right? Or I'm going to make this decision and that decision, which will ensure that I can access this other thing, right? Not in the that guy killed my father, so I'm going to hunt him down sense of the in character as character player, but in the if I can if I can earn this many experience points in this session, then I can buy or upgrade or improve or change or whatever this other thing next session. Or if I don't use this resource, then at the end of the session I can spend this resource and cause this big effect for my character. I can cause some kind of character development or improvement. I can trigger a milestone. I can, those kinds of thoughts. Still very much focused around the character. Still very much focused on playing in character, and yet less harmed, less interfered with by the concept of talking to other players as players. There are more things about a system which encourages and supports that kind of play, which requires you to step out of character, right? To talk as yourself, to cash in a chip, or to talk about motivation, or to talk about, I'm trying to do this, or to set up another scene, or I'd like to introduce a new character into the fiction, and that kind of stuff, right? So the in character as a form of creator, or as author, still in character, but with a wider view and requiring less rigor in terms of the type of communication that is going to be allowed, the type of thoughts that are going to be allowed, the way that information is handled, the whole old arguments about meta-knowledge, your character wouldn't know that, and that kind of stuff. This is a very serious discussion for the in-character as character player, and it's a much less serious discussion for the person who's approached the table thinking, let's play differently. Now, imagine not having even these terms, right? But these people are in the same group. So you have someone who is shifting effortlessly back and forth between their character's perspective and a wider perspective involving character arcs, involving development, involving meta currency, and that sort of stuff. And then someone else who is kind of frustrated every time that happens, or who doesn't really like it when games that have those elements in them are brought to the table. They still play, they still have fun, but they really wish they were playing something else, right? So without even these labels to use, and labels are often a problem, because as soon as we put them on something, people try to squirm out of them. But even without these labels, it can be difficult to really express why it is that some games work better at the table than others. But let's keep going. What's the game master doing all of this? The game master might be sitting there saying, I really love, in-character play. I hate it when players talk out of character. Now, they're talking about when players stop playing and start talking as players, right? Rather than planning their heist as their characters in the scene, they get up, go to the kitchen, make coffee, and talk to each other, not involving their characters. They talk to each other about stuff, right? We've maybe all been there at some point or another. But that game master, how much of their play is in character as character, right? Where are they? Well, they're still pretty much in character, the way they represent their NPCs, the way that they're bringing the atmosphere, the tone, maybe the genre of the world to life. But they're definitely not as character, are they? They don't even have a character. And they're not overly concerned with the details of individual character arcs per se. They are more concerned with all of them, right? Providing opportunities, providing situations, maybe even providing plot points or something along those lines. So they're one step further removed, not just a creator, right? Some kind of facilitator of all of the different aspects around the table. We could refer to this person as a director. We could, right? So we could go from character to author to director. That's a nice linear passage, but we could think about it differently. We could think about this person as a facilitator, as a patron. We could think of it as someone with that broader worldview, but still very much focused on what's going on inside the world from the perspective of being a part of it in character, being there in the game, right? So when I watch people play, when I talk about play, I can see these positions, and you can see people shifting back and forth. For example, the game master who has a character, the GMPC, you can watch them shift. You can almost see it on their face. You can watch them shift from one stance to the other stance, where they're playing their character and making decisions, maybe in character as character in that moment, limiting themselves to just what that character knows. Although the more they know, the harder that is, right? You can see people shift. The game itself has an effect on how you can shift. It may only give you the tools for in-character as character play, or it may give you the tools for in-character as author play, or it may require that everybody there contribute like a game master. There may not even be a game master. So where does out of character come into all of this? Well, out of character is concerned with still playing the game. It can still be concerned with character concerns, or what we might continue to call authorial concerns or directorial concerns. All of these things might occur in out of character play. It doesn't all have to be that beer and pretzels stuff. It doesn't have to be moving a pawn, right, while you laugh. It doesn't have to be the silly names. My paladin's name is Bob the Mechanic. You know, I'm in a Star Wars game and my freighter is called the USS Fraggle Rock or whatever. I mean, it doesn't have to be that kind of play just because it's out of character. Out of character play in character could be a stance where our view of the game and its mechanics are an intrinsic part of how we view the game itself. That's a pretty vague way to describe it. Let's say if I'm in character as character, I'm trying to get far away from what I would do and try to get as close to what that character would do as I can with a minimum of thinking about it. Whereas in out of character play, I might recognize the fact that there are things that I want to do, and I've chosen this character to do them. But part of what I want to do is to enjoy those limits on my decision-making ability or my ability to affect the game world. Imagine that. Imagine the in-character as character player feeling a sense of interruption whenever they have to interact with the system, right? Oh, when I have to roll the dice or when I have to, gather together a dice pool or something, it takes me out of my immersion. We've heard people say this. Is this because they're in character as character? Or is it because they're struggling a little bit with what the game is asking them to do? We might encounter that very statement from an in-character as character player or from an out-of-character as character player. It's not a definite sign, but it's something to make you think. When a game is constantly asking for rolls, we could imagine ourselves dipping into character and rising back into out of character and then dipping back into character and rising up right into out of character. We can imagine that going on, and we can imagine ourselves getting more and more fluent or facile doing it. And I definitely think this happens. We can see this. But what if it doesn't always have to happen? What if you are out of character the whole time, completely focused on how you're playing the game from an in-character stance, or an authorial stance, or a directorial stance, or however you want to phrase those different levels of expanding control, right? Regardless of what you want to call them, games give us certain amounts of control. And that's really what I'm referring to. And those expanding spheres or areas of control affect how the game plays, affects how people play them, affects the levels of satisfaction that different people have, affects the way that we can comfortably approach them. And I think all of that is very interesting and possibly useful. It's possible that there have been no problems ever with you and your fellow gamers playing. It's also possible that there have been problems that haven't been noticed, even by the person having them. Sometimes we're not really aware of what's bothering us. Sometimes we're not the best judge of what it is that we are doing. And sometimes the thing that we complain about most loudly is the thing that's concerning us the most, and not maybe in the way that we think. So for all of these reasons, I've put together this vocabulary, and today I'm sharing it with you. I don't know if it'll ever be useful, but it might be. Take care.